So it's a pleasure to be here, and as Stuart said, we are going to be talking about a process we've gone through over the last year with a group of other colleagues within the Tyndall Centre of trying to produce a travel strategy which is consistent with our research findings. So I've lost the slide, but essentially our premise behind developing a travel strategy is that our research tells us very much that our CO2 emissions must be rapidly reduced to avoid dangerous climate change. Travel in particular represents a significant proportion of an academic's carbon footprint, and it's one of the most hardest sectors to try and mitigate. If you think of the rail system, road system, shipping and aviation, it requires quite significant technological and behavioural transformations to try and reduce emissions from those sectors. And in particular, flying is particularly more difficult to reduce than that. There are no zero carbon aircraft available at the moment, and the rate of improvement in efficiency is more than outweighed by the growth in demand. So this led a number of us within Tyndall to become very concerned about our carbon footprint, and you will see it was put very bluntly by our Deputy Director, Kevin Anderson, in a blog that he produced, which you can read online at http://kevinanderson.info, where he accused anyone working within climate change that flew as being hypocrites in the air. And he built very much on his research that looked at the urgency of emission reductions and the difficulties of decarbonising the transport system, and argued that he should take a systems view as well as looking at the individual carbon impact of a journey, that travelling by air encouraged travel which you wouldn't otherwise take part in, because it effectively perpetuates the demand. The convenience of flying makes us travel even more than we would do anyway. And he actually questioned whether we really need to be in certain places in person to deliver what he called our pearls of wisdom. Do we have to be there in present, or can we not do it virtually another way? So, to give you context, actually this is a different presentation to the one I have in front of me, but to give you a little bit of context of our premise, a background to this. This is a slide that shows you the non-residential buildings emissions associated with the different institutions associated with the Tyndall Centre, which includes Cambridge, Newcastle, Oxford, Manchester, Sussex, East Anglia, Cardiff and Southampton. And what I've done is taken the scope 1 and 2 emissions from our buildings and divided it through by the number of full-time equivalent staff and students in the right-hand column. This kind of gives you a context by which I'd like to compare some of our travel emissions. Can I ask if I can upload another document from my own files? Is that possible, David?
You want to upload?
Yeah.
What exactly?
Upload, something from my own files rather than the shared history.
You can share your screen. That would be the easiest. Yeah.
Okay.
Just click the share my screen button in the middle of the screen. No. Once again.
I think this might.
You don't want to upload. Yeah. You don't want to upload. You want to share your screen, I think.
I think this might have what I'm after on it. So
Pardon?
try that.
Okay. You're uploading a file now, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. I think this is
okay.
What I want to get hold of.
Okay.
It's got some
okay,
graphs
that's fine.
I'd like to show some graphs which put travel emissions in the context of the building emissions of each of the universities. And it gives you some context as to why we're worried or why travel plays such a significant part of the carbon footprint of a climate change researcher. So this This should be it.
Okay.
So, flying by Tyndall members. This graph is the results of a survey that was taken back in 2012, and some colleagues surveyed members of the Tyndall Centre about how often they flew and to different parts of the world. So how often they flew to within the UK, within Europe, or within the rest of the world. And as you can see, there are a significant proportion of people that responded that no, they never flew. And so about 80% of people never fly domestically, that's within the UK. About 30 to 40% never fly within Europe or the rest of the world even. But still a significant proportion of our respondents, at 79%, have done some flying within the last year. And that varied from a flight once a year right up to people who are flying more than 4 times a year. So that gives us a kind of a context and background from which we'd like to reduce our emissions. And this goes back again to the emissions from each institution to give some background. I'm based in Manchester, so my benchmark of my institutional emissions is about 1,300 kilograms per annum. And against this, I've compared some journeys that I might make on a typical research project. So my benchmark is the university emissions, and that's the 100% figure. And I'm comparing different journeys against that along the right-hand side of the axis. So for example, if I wanted to travel to the Tyndall Centre's headquarters down in Norwich at UEA, I would either expend about 42 to 146 kilograms of CO2 just on that journey. That's between 3% and 11% of my carbon footprint. Now, obviously that's a fairly small amount, but if I did that regularly, it would soon build up. If, for example, I wanted to fly to Tyndall's Fudan partner, who are based in Shanghai, that would end up with almost 3 times as much carbon as my per capita institutional carbon in 1 year. So that's just one flight with 3 times that. And similarly, if I wanted to go to a conference in Australia, for example, that's almost 5 times annual emissions associated with the infrastructure of my university. So it's pretty significant emissions to try and reduce. So this is part of the reason why we developed our strategy, and the aim of that strategy is to reduce our travel-related emissions at a rate and level consistent with reductions necessary to avoid dangerous climate change. And by that I mean a 2-degree mean temperature increase. So to come up with that strategy, we got feedback from a lot of researchers, and we're trying to make sure that we do it with due consideration where that's appropriate for different people's career stages and the requirements of their actual job. So one of the comments that we've received back when putting the possibility of a travel strategy out there was that some individuals are early career researchers, and as part of that, they need to travel to promote their work, to meet collaborators, to meet future employers, to really get their name out there and continue on an academic pathway. And that links up to one of the other concerned voices, was that for many of us, part of our promotions criteria is to get international references. So to have people, non-UK academics, provide us a research as part of our promotion package. So we provide those references as part of our application for promotion. So how could you get these academic references if you don't travel? Another reason was traveling is actually a condition of our research contract. You're doing research in a developing country, you're requested almost to travel to that country to carry out your field work. It might be that you're part of a joint European project and you would like to, or you have to, by definition, travel to meet your European partners. Another argument which was placed for those a bit more senior in their career was that they travel to get funding. So a lot of the research councils will hold workshops and you have to be there to benefit any of the money that they get. So you have to get funding in some places. We also travel as part of our academic career to carry out PhD vivas in other institutions, attend research council meetings, for example, if you are part of a panel member where you decide upon who should be getting research funding. You need to be there in person to take part in that process. And finally, one of the most common rationales that's provided about flying and travelling in particular is that we fly because we're telling policymakers about the importance of our research, and that more than makes up for any emissions that we produce in the course of that travel. Over to Stuart, if he's looks as if Stuart's been kicked out. But we had a poll, and we'd like to ask people whether they think it's acceptable to fly if you're communicating your climate change research to policymakers. Now, I'm not sure how to do a full poll, but I guess the easy thing to do is if you raise your hand. I think there's a little button on the top of the screen. If you raise your hand if you think it is, yes, acceptable to fly if you're communicating your climate change research to policymakers. Oh, Stuart's back. Brilliant. So
sorry about this.
Got a hand half up for yes. Anyone for no, it's not acceptable to fly if your ration is communicating your research to policymakers? So one there. Anyone who's undecided, it depends. So about three votes on it depends, and Jakob and Martin also it depends. Stuart, do you want to take over? And
yeah, sure. Sorry, for some reason I keep dropping off here, but you can hear me now, can you?
I can, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah. So sorry, I've missed some of the earlier discussion there, but one of the things that we were curious that we wanted to find out about why. I mean, we had a number of people there. I think at least a couple of people who said it depends, and so there's personal justifications, there's academic, professional justifications. I'd be interested to hear from the people who suggested it depends as to what it depends upon. What is a good enough justification to fly if you're communicating research to policymakers? I think maybe Dan was one of the people who said it depends. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dan?
Oh, it's like Dan's typing.
Dan's typing. Can Dan talk,
yep.
Or I'm not sure if he's allowed to.
Dan could actually talk. Yeah, Dan, if you're trying to talk, please just activate your microphone at the top of the screen.
It may be he doesn't have a microphone plugged in.
Oh, he said disagree. Okay, Dan, why did you say disagree? Do tell us why. Do tell us why.
For anybody that reads The Guardian, apparently there's emissions are cumulative.
Okay.
So
okay, can you express a little bit more detail on what you mean by that? Because I think, I mean, there's been some interesting debate in one of the British newspapers just recently. There was quite a forceful article saying that those who are concerned about environmental issues should fly. And the interesting thing about that article, much of which I didn't agree with, was that essentially it was making the case that those people who can make a climate change policy, who can make a difference to sustainability issues, essentially the good that is done by those actions kind of outweighs. They didn't use the word offset, but outweighs the harm that is done. So I guess there's a trade-off there. And yeah, I mean, clearly a lot of people who have a lot of influence on policy do fly. So under what circumstances is it justifiable to do that? I just wanted to ask if there's any of the participants who have microphone access, whether they might want to make a comment on this, just because we wanted to sort of bring people in to speak to have some thoughts on this. I don't know if that's going to work.
Hi, this is Jacob. Can you hear me?
Hello, Jacob. I can hear you.
Hi. Oh, great. So thanks. This is a really interesting question. And I think part of this depends on to what extent can policy actually influence our future climate. And I think this is uncertain. If some hypothetical meeting of policymakers and scientists actually led to a real global climate policy that actually reduced emissions substantially, then I think it would be worth everybody's plane ticket to get there. But of course, if that meeting led to not much change, then you're not really gaining much out of flying.
Can I ask you whether your perception is that perhaps the carbon footprint of the many people who do fly to, for example, conferences, whether that personally would think that is worth the carbon footprints of that for the steps forward that have been achieved, if you think there are any at all?
Well, I hope that it's worth it. I'll say that. I'm not convinced that the steps forward have been substantial enough that we can say that it was worth the carbon investment. Things like the Kyoto Protocol may have been good, but not enough of the major nations, the US, for example, signed on to it. If we can really get climate policy that works, then I think it's worth a short-term carbon investment for the travel. But part of me thinks that maybe actually getting our nations to achieve sustainable climate policy is more of a bottom-up approach, more of a grassroots. At least some things. I think we've just had great discussions about universities and corporations taking leads in some aspects. But I don't know to what extent policy can really dictate a sustainable climate future, and so I'm skeptical about the meetings that have occurred so far and whether or not that's worth the investment. So I have to say it depends, because I have to think that some good can be done at the policy level, but I didn't say yes because I think there's a lot of superfluous meetings that don't really get a lot done.
Yeah, sure. I suppose I personally would go along with them. And as someone, I work in public perceptions of climate change research, and something you do hear from people when you do this research quite often is, and it relates to the title of our talk, the leading by example, is that there's hardly a very good signal being put across by these huge carbon-intensive conferences, as Kevin Anderson, I think, put in his blog about hypocrites in the air, or he's put it somewhere. Conferences in holiday locations like Cancun. There always seem to be very nice places. So I noticed that Jacob, you commented as well about Al Gore, clearly someone who has been very influential in this area, and you referred to the private jet. This to me really sort of jars, I suppose. I think that, I think you can get, even if you're going to fly, you can get around the place in economy class. Let's be honest about this, So there are issues as well about even if you are flying, how you choose to fly, and the private jet is frankly beyond the pale. I would suggest. Is there anyone else who wants to come in on this, and perhaps someone who was said yes to the, or do we need to move on, Ruth?
I think Inga had a hand up earlier.
Okay.
Inga, did you have any comments?
I did. I just wanted to.
I think we've lost Inga halfway through her. Well, I've lost Inga. While she gets back, I think, Adam, you had something to say as well?
I did. Also relating to this question, so on the one hand, we had the issue of COPs, and I suppose we're still all hoping that one day this deal, this global deal, is going to arise, and I think you know, sort of a certain level of participation there, if it does one day arise, is probably justified. Whether we need to have several hundred strong delegations flying across the world, I would very much doubt. So that would be certainly something I'd point to. I think 45,000 people travelled to Copenhagen in 2009, and so that's certainly a question. And I think the question is really difficult. This sort of, you know, the it depends sort of question, you know, because it's hard to know in advance, you know, to be you know, sort of maybe not quite being realistic, but which piece of information is going to be the game changer, and what if I didn't fly and didn't communicate the game changer, you know? On the other hand, you know, there are also other ways of communicating, and would the flying have made a difference? Could we have done it virtually like we're doing it now? I think it's a very difficult question to answer.
Is Inga able
yeah,
to
I mean,
speak?
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry, I got chucked, and now I'm back. I mean, I just wanted to, well, basically Adam's now said it for me. I wonder whether there aren't just way too many meetings around the COP meetings that people fly to, like the whole Planet Under Pressure series or others, which attract literally thousands but do not really achieve anything in terms of policy. They're just a place to prepare for the actual meeting. And there is a sort of, I think Helga 2 days ago used the term vanity parade, which I see a lot in climate change, which is really depressing, the feeling that people just want to be seen and just want to be there and hang out with their mates rather than actually discuss policy.
I think if I could chip in as well. I mean, one thing that sort of struck me around Copenhagen in particular is that a lot of people who were not kind of invited to be there, activists and so on, who travelled there from all over Europe by bus and by train. That was perfectly possible to do that. But it comes back to the last presentation we had. That there is a choice, there is a possibility for a lot of people, especially if you're travelling within Europe.
Okay, shall we move on to the next slide, which is another set of criteria which we've been struggling with and trying to come up with a response to, and that is, oh, I can't share the next slide, and that effectively is the commitments and other circumstances that affect researchers and when they're deciding how to travel, when to travel, and how long they can dedicate to travelling. So one of the comments from colleagues has been that they have, the ones that are trying to juggle teaching and research, is that they have teaching commitments, and therefore if the conference or an event or meeting takes place during term time, then they can't take the time out that it would spend for them to travel by train somewhere. They say it takes too long and they wouldn't be able to get back in time to fulfill their teaching commitments. Another of the, oh, there we go. Another comment is that if you have a disability of some form and traveling long distance by train is difficult, then flying can be your only option in certain circumstances. And finally, the other one, here we go, is many people have family commitments, be that children, be that caring for parents, be that caring for a spouse, and they're not able to take that much time out by train. Any time they spend away in a meeting that's not absolutely essential creates difficulties in fulfilling their caring responsibilities. So that, I think, leads us to another discussion point, is that is having family commitments a reason to fly rather than spend longer travelling by land? But Stuart, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I'm actually here for the start of this one, so that's good. Yeah, I mean, this comes back to, I mean, we were just discussing just now about the kind of professional reasons why someone might want Brussels when they would have rather taken the train because they're a small child. So it, I guess, comes to the point of exceptions to the rule, as it were, and the blurring of boundaries between personal and private life. If you have no commitments, if you've got lots of time, if you've got the money, is that fine? But where does the real world intrude? And so, imagining, for example, one has a meeting to travel to at the other end of Europe, based on the last presentations, let's say a 15-hour journey. Is having the family commitment of, say, a small child reason enough, shall we say, to take this case in point, to fly rather than spend longer travelling by land? Okay, now how does this hand thing work? Should we get a show of hands for yes to start with? Okay, so there's just one there. Do we have a show of hands for the no's? Okay, I might take people up on this, and just to check that the remaining responses are it depends. Can we have a show of hands for the it depends? Okay, so let me just make sure I've got. Okay, so I think I'm right in saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that Martin, you said that you answered yes. If you've got microphone access, perhaps you might want to add your thoughts on that.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Good. I thought I'd connect with the webcam for this bit, as I controversially was the only person who said yes. I keep getting dropped, so apologies if I don't stay for the rest of this sentence. Hopefully I'll make it to the end. I don't know, it's difficult. I have children. I'd be interested to know how many of the people who said no have children and think that they would. I mean, I said no being in the situation of having children. I do some, well, I haven't done any long traveling for years, so it's kind of interesting that I answered no, because I don't tend to fly anywhere. And I have made long trains, and it's been awkward because it's been extra days away from home when, you know, leaving my wife to look after the kids on her own. In that respect, I didn't feel very good about it, particularly things like I had a lovely time traveling by train to the south of France and going to a meeting and not having a horrible time in the plane. So I was kind of a half hander.
Sure. Well, that's being put on the spot there as the one yes person. I mean, I didn't put my hand up for those. I would have said no, or it depends. Perhaps if I could reflect on just briefly on an experience I had this summer. We went. I've got a small child who was 1.5 at the time, a very lively child at that, and I went with the young child and my wife to Europe on holiday, and we went by train. Most of that was fine, but some of it was really quite hard. There were times, I admit, I thought, why, you know, this is me imposing the kind of flying thing on it. And I did think at times, why am I doing this to everyone? We could have got a plane, and it would have made life so much easier. You know, having got back home again, I'm glad I did it, and I would do it again. But it can be, especially with young kids, it can be tougher. Martin, the example of you know, being away from your family, and that's quite a personal wrench, especially if you've got very small children. So yeah, I would have said no, but I can see that it's pretty tough. Perhaps Dan hasn't got microphone access. Inga, can I ask you why you said no?
Okay, I have to out myself then. I don't have any children, so I don't know what that would be like, but I used to be a child, and our parents never flew. We went everywhere over Europe, to Ireland, to Scotland, to all over Scandinavia, to Spain, to Poland, with trains and ferry boats and the car. And we had, well, I had very good memories of this. I, as a child, never found it stressful. I can see that business travel would probably be a different thing because you need to be somewhere at a certain time. But I also believe that sort of non-air travel has huge advantages for children because they can be much easier entertained. They can run around in trains and in ferry boats, and so it's probably this one. So I said no because I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Can I say
it's certainly possible.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd quite happily take the kids on holiday by train. Wouldn't think twice about that. When I did travel to the south of France for work by train, it was 9 hours door to door, Norwich to Marseille, which you'd struggle to do much better than that by plane when you have to travel to the airport, wait for 2 hours in the airport, and then get off the plane in the airport that's 50 miles from the city centre. So I actually think for travelling, personal travel with children, I think it's almost a no-brainer. But yeah, business travel is difficult, and I can imagine. I guess I put my hand up because I can imagine a lot of people with children who maybe have slightly less strong feelings about reducing carbon emissions wouldn't they be a very strong justification for taking it back.
I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on. I mean, one of the things that Ruth referred to in the previous slide was potentially someone having a disability, and this is a very real issue, and also questions of exceptions and exemptions again. I mean, does anyone have any thoughts on whether, if you have a physical disability that makes it difficult for you to sit on a train for 15 hours, should you be excluded from what other people are doing, or not? I mean, I wonder if I could ask someone who hasn't come in yet. I think, Asher, are you there? I see Mins. Possibly not. Or someone else. Does someone else want to sort of comment on this issue of other exceptions and other special cases?
Hi, Jacob. I guess the last time I flew was for bereavement. One of my grandparents passed away, and I think most people wouldn't think twice about flying if they could to mourn and be with their loved ones. And that's kind of an interesting exception that most people do face just because it's part of life. And I don't know how many even climate scientists who take the train as much as possible. If you have the opportunity to mourn with your family, most people probably will fly. Whether or not that's a good reason, I mean, I would tend to say that's a good reason, but it is carbon spent and it's worth thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty powerful case in point, isn't it? I mean, and I think you'd have to be have pretty very strong opinions to sort of suggest that someone couldn't mourn and be with their family under those circumstances. I mean, and I think your point underscores that. I don't know. Maybe there's a sliding scale of these things, and that a lot of the discussion seems to be bringing out these questions of it depends. I see Dan's comment here that about family being an interesting one. Climate change is all about families, as in it's other peoples who will be damaged by the impacts of climate change. So I guess the point he's making, even if I'm wrong, is that perhaps one might find oneself in a difficult ethical position of taking a step which benefits one's own family, but which ultimately is detrimental to somebody else's family or some future people. So yeah, I think we carry on.
I was just thinking, Adam had something to add as well. Did you want to comment?
Sure, just a brief comment. I think one of the issues we've been looking at in the framework of the Climate Change Centre Austria, which is just being set up, which is a bit of a sort of an equivalent to the Tyndall Centre, although sort of just being started and much smaller at the moment in terms of this kind of time issue, is what is counted as work time or what not. So sort of there's the argument, if I take the train, I'm going to be away from home, and if one has children, then longer away from home. But if one actually sort of, and there's the issue of sort of trust there as well, if I was actually going to spend that time working and can book a significant amount of working time for that travel, then one can actually just take a day off or whatever the week after to sort of make up for that. Might that not be a way, and that's sort of models we're looking at here as well, a way of going around that problem?
Yeah, do you want to come in on that, Ruth?
Yeah, I think that would be a very good solution, to have sort of time off in lieu for travel time. One of the difficulties I struggle with is that there is so much work to do. It's very difficult to actually take that time off in lieu. So even if in theory we have X number of days holiday a year, or we have time off in lieu for certain things, fitting that time in with demands and immediate deadlines in the workplace is often quite difficult. So I think it would be great. It's the practicalities of it, I think, is always going to be the challenge. Okay, so
The argument.
So those are some of the down.
Oops.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, something weird happened with my audio then. But something odd happened with my audio then. But no, I was just going to quickly say, I mean, with respect to your point about time pressures, I guess this is one of the main arguments, isn't it? As well as cost, is that there are those pressures, and it's hard to get. I mean, 5 days of the week as it is, and so I guess this is a big pressure on people. Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
So we're going to obviously try and come up with some guidelines on when we should be saying no to travelling, when we should be saying yes to travelling. And once we've done that, one of the key steps is to try and measure and monitor our ongoing progress in delivering our emission reductions. So we've got a challenge of trying to create something really quick and simple to fill in, because the Tyndall Centre is based under multiple sites. We have very different ways of booking our travel and paying for it and the like. So it's going to end up being sort of a separate monitoring mechanism to our institutional monitoring mechanisms. But we've also got to make sure that it's as accurate as possible, in that it can monitor our emission reductions over time. So taking into account both changes in our travel patterns and also the technological progress taken by different transport modes. Say, for example, European train travel, as it hopefully will happen, the electricity grid becomes more decarbonised, then we want to be able to try and have a kind of almost a real-time monitoring of the emission reductions that we achieve. In complement to that, to ensure that we continue to get our research out there, we're trying to come up with a scheme where we can provide and demonstrate low carbon alternatives, which will enable us to continue engaging with people, continuing generating new ideas, new research projects, and also communicating our research to a wider audience. So that involves we have a seminar series that uses WebEx. We use Skype calls and conference calls for a lot of the work we've been doing over the travel strategy, for example, and enhanced conferences, which I'll give you an example of. So the Tyndall Centre's Radical Emission Reduction Conference, which is taking place in London in a few weeks' time. The conference is basically trying to get together ideas and practical solutions to delivering rapid emission reductions. We've got about 36 speakers, 10 of whom will be speaking live via a web link. We're going to try and organise it so there's a live web streaming. It's going to be one way at the moment. The team that are involved in sorting out the conference are trying to work out a way of getting questions in live via Twitter, for example. So we're trying to put in practice some of the principles which will go into this travel emission strategy and really start to demonstrate what's possible. And the final cornerstone of it will be a clear position statement that will try and help enable our researchers to say no to unnecessary travel, something that they can cite to empower them to ask for virtual participation at a meeting or a conference, and try and move it to the norm to be enhanced conferencing using online participation and the like. and ultimately want to help create the web-based research space and maintain and even enhance the research quality and access to it while cutting down this archaic travelling behaviour down to zero. So we're finalising our strategy in January 2014, and hopefully it will be certainly published online and develop guidance for members to use, and hopefully offer it to other people that are interested in seeing what we're doing. So that's the end of our rapid canter through some of the issues we've been thinking about. I've just got a few questions that have come up in addition to those already asked. For example, if somebody else is paying for you to travel somewhere, for example, if you're going to be an examiner at somebody's PhD visa, are the emissions their responsibility too, or are they yours? Should we be including commuting to work in our strategy? If you're the leader of a group and you are travelling to present all the research of your group somewhere, should they share your emissions? Is it ever acceptable? And under what circumstances it's acceptable to fly for work purposes? And finally, how do we ensure that our online activities deliver a net carbon reduction? If we're using very IT intensive services, which are hosted on a server in China, which are served with a coal-fired electricity, then how can we make sure that we are actually delivering that saving and it does outweigh the travel carbon emissions? So I'll leave that kind of an open discussion for anybody to please chip in with their thoughts and views on these questions.
I'm quite interested if I could chip in. I don't have an answer to this, and perhaps you might actually have some thoughts on this, Ruth. I mean, I'm not someone who understands, shall we say, the numbers of. I mean, I know that numbers for carbon emissions from flying are huge, and that's the motivation for our travel strategy and for the discussion today. I mean, do you have any sort of thoughts on by what sort of orders of magnitude online activities might compare to flying? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because I would assume that even though clearly there is an implication, a consequence, I would have thought that would pretty much, if you compare, say, the 10 of us talking here now to flying somewhere to have this meeting, surely that must be many times less. I mean, does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
The kind of big server farms have power consumption on the order of megawatts. So I mean, they're major power consumers, but they're spread across a large number of people, and also the kind of server load required for doing something like this, whilst more than for one of us to be browsing Facebook or whatever, which we're probably all doing at the same time anyway, or posting to Twitter, we're talking about a relatively small community. So relative to the total power demand from online activity across the globe, it's going to be pretty tiny. But we do need to be comparative with the emissions from flying, certainly. And I mean, I can't give you an answer to that, but we can probably find out. And one important distinction is that you can power server farms with solar and wind power, and you can't power planes with solar and wind, so, or nuclear.
I think going back to Dan's point earlier about the challenge being cumulative emissions, a lot of the premises for incentivizing or promoting train over flying is that the emissions are low now, they have the potential to be much, much lower in the future. And it's quite a gamble in that they're still going to be pretty high compared in, so say in 2050, by the time we need to be reducing our emissions radically. So we're kind of incentivizing lots of people to do one thing over maybe reducing it in some ways. So we've got to make sure that we're not locking ourselves into another potentially high carbon behaviour if the other prerequisites don't fall into place. So if the grid isn't decarbonised, that needs to almost happen as a prerequisite for incentivising that type of technology change or behaviour change. So I'm conscious we've got 10 minutes left of this session. Is there anybody that would like to contribute or give us feedback? Or comments on anything we've said so far?
Okay. I just sorry, I've been talking quite a lot, but I'll just try and be brief because someone else might want to say something. I just thought when you were sort of referring to the last slide there, Ruth, I think it's really worth, and I know you're aware of this yourself, but in terms of the Tyndall travel strategy and the kind of motivations for doing this, obviously there seems to be a lot of a sense that I mean, in the point in terms of enabling people to say no to air travel, that there's often a sense that this is kind of a sacrifice or something that you're having to push at the kind of norms. And I think that there's a wider point that about making the sorts of communication such as we're doing today as a positive alternative, not just something that is something we have to put up with, that it's detrimental, but to actually make it an attractive experience. And I mean, I've done a couple of these things now, and I really enjoy them. And I took part with someone else in a seminar over the summer, quite a high-profile conference in the USA, and it was great. I didn't have to fly there. I could dip in and out of the other talks. I couldn't have possibly gone to the conference otherwise because I couldn't afford it. So I think it's worth noting that these events can actually be really positive, and we should always mention the positive side of this, as well as just positive for carbon emissions.
I think Inga has her hand up as well. Inga, did you want to come in?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry, my mic wasn't connected. Good. Well, I was also thinking that the whole inclusiveness of these meetings really struck me, especially on the first day, that you were able to get people to attend the conference from all over the world, who probably would not have been able to just travel to Vienna for a couple of days. So I think that is really important.
Inga, are you back with us again, or is it just me that's lost you?
Sorry, I think it may have been everything. So our company has a lot of readers and users in sub-Saharan Africa, and we've never been able to organize anything with them because of lack of funds, the amazing distances. So just doing this conference has really made me notice how easy it is to get people together online. And I think that's a huge advantage that people often don't see.
And I'd say also that visas can be a big issue for people travelling from certain parts of the world. If the conference is hosted in Europe or the States, trying to get a good representation of people from all over the world, getting visa for a conference can be a massive issue. That completely opens out.
We ultimately failed to do anything of the sort because even sort of coming to Europe is was very difficult, but even sort of inter-African travel was nearly impossible. To get from Kenya to Tanzania was so hard, and so it's a pity that we never managed to do anything. So I think for people, from outside Europe, it's great. It's a fantastic opportunity, and it's so easy as well.
Adam, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So a comment and a question. I think, what we've been trying to do with this conference is sort of provide a bit of a sort of a room for experimenting, and then sort of further down the line, and as a part of this, really try and point to the positives. And just an anecdote from Tuesday, which was rather nice. As a colleague, she's not online today, but she's been with us for the first 3 days of the conference, who made the point that she's actually she's pregnant, and were the conference somewhere where she would have to travel, she wouldn't have been able to make it, simply because she's sort of quite far into her pregnancy. But as it was online, she's able to attend and sort of really enjoy it. And I think there's probably so many stories with which we can sort of make. And I'm not just talking about online conferencing, the whole train issue and all of these other things. We need to attach sort of positive stories and success stories to them, and that way we can sort of go on. And just one question, Ruth, regarding the Tyndall travel strategy, and apologies if you mentioned it and I missed it. As you saw, I was only able to join a little later on. What is sort of the final take on flying? So is flying allowed, and in certain circumstances, and if yes, under what circumstances is it allowed?
Good question. At the moment, there is a carbon reduction target. So I guess if it fits within the carbon reduction target at the moment, it's possible. But we haven't come down. I don't think we've come down either way on what's appropriate and what's not. We've come up with a decision tree to help people say, well, could you do this another way? Have you thought about this? Is it how important is this trip? Does it come under our criteria of a must-do trip? Can you get there another way? So we're coming up with guidance for individuals to make up their own mind, partly because Tyndall's not it doesn't really have power over individuals who are members of it to say you must do this, you must do that. So it's trying to be a facilitator to engage and promote low carbon research. So we can't be too dictatorial in that approach. I don't know, Stuart, you wanted to say anything?
I think. I mean, it's a bit from memory. I haven't actually looked at the working document for a little while, but I mean, I think that the conclusions that we've come to is it's a sort of a sliding scale. There's well justified, less well justified, not well justified kind of criteria, and it's divided by level of the stage of your career. So, for example, if you're an early career researcher, then it's deemed well justified to travel internationally to get your research. But if you're because you need to make those links and etc. Whereas if you're later in your career, you need more justification than that. I mean, I think, and the point as well is that there is a kind of a fairly simple formula by which you depending how well justified it is, you kind of have a factor of 1, 2, or 3, and then you multiply your mileage or emissions by that. So it's kind of a yes, no, good, bad type of thing. You get a number based on a simple formula. So yeah, we'll see how that works. I mean, it does. But by the current sort of criteria, it's pretty much okay to do anything if you're an early career researcher, which I don't know, maybe needs tweaking a bit. I don't know what you think about that, Ruth.
I think as time goes on and the emission reduction target we're heading towards gets even more difficult to get to, less and less flying will be able to fit within that carbon budget. So I think it's probably a work. It will end up being a transition slowly towards something which air travel is certainly not done twice a year, 3 times a year as it is than now. It's a much rarer event. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
We'll be on.
Yeah.
It's come up to 5 o'clock. I know, Adam, you're delivering the next session. Would you like to take over?
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to take over. I think we'll just have a couple of minutes break before the next session starts. I just wanted to, but before we do so, just make one last comment regarding this sort of young researcher, beginning of the career, but also this kind of whole issue of. So Erica Thompson from London School of Economics brought this up on Tuesday. Said she just doesn't fly to conferences. Colleagues ask her whether she's committing career suicide by doing so, and so on. And well, a good point is that 2030 question is, do we really need it now, or is this kind of a cultural issue that we also need to work on? I think I'll just sort of leave that open. I'd like to take the opportunity to say a big thank you to Ruth and Stuart for that very engaging, very interesting session.